as a Canadian. We're currently in the 11th year of the US and NATO-led war and occupation of Afghanistan. But American involvement in Afghanistan goes back 4 decades now, and British interference has been ongoing for centuries. Afghans, Canadians, Europeans, Americans, citizens all around the world have had enough. Afghans are dying. Our country's heritage continues to be destroyed. The economic situation is as dire as ever. And the mission is creating and backing an unstable and illegitimate government that can't even honor its own claims to democracy. But the worst part of it all is that the mission is delaying the political and social progress that we Afghans must come together to unite and reject forms of outside interference, imperialism, oppression, and extremism, and ultimately build a stable peace. What we're seeing in Afghanistan right now, it's not a stable peace. Things were bad enough in 2001 before NATO entered the scene in Afghanistan. 11 years later, and we're faced with the daunting task of first undoing the damage that's been done by NATO, and then taking on the pre-existing issues that culminated in the ongoing civil war, poverty, and violation of basic rights. There's been little in the way of novel improvements, while the underlying issues that created the turmoil of the past 4 decades have been ignored and continue to serve as barriers in achieving everlasting peace in the country. The summit in Chicago will seek to continue NATO's destructive role in the country and ultimately deny Afghans our right to self-determine. Not because NATO believes it is acting in the best interest of Afghans, as they claim, but because the notion of a so-called democracy need be forced on the people everywhere under terms dictated by the West. Not even for the security of the Western population, but for Western firms. Our politicians will have us believe that Canada is in this mission as we have a duty to contribute to NATO, with the underlying assumption that we must choose one evil alliance in the world geopolitical scene or another in order to survive. So Afghans must unfortunately die for our Canadian way of life to continue. As a Canadian, I find this approach appalling and demoralizing. While I fully appreciate the realities of international politics and the need to cooperate with our international partners, as a nation, Canada can be a much greater country than one that seeks to build its legacy at the expense of justice and ethics and other people's lives. Rather, I imagine a Canada that leads, not follows, even in the presence of more powerful counterparts. I dream of a Canada that determines its own affairs rather than have them politely dictated from abroad or by a troubled coalition. I know that a truly successful Canada is one that attains affluence and influence in the world without compromising values of justice, freedom, and human rights. So instead of participating in the NATO-led invasion of Afghanistan, NATO-led invasion of Afghanistan, Canada should be opposing it. Instead of offering further defense commitments in Chicago, Canada should be opposing the U.S.-Afghan Strategic Partnership, which seeks to create permanent military bases in Afghanistan until at least 2024. Ongoing military presence in the country will ensure that the corrupt government of Hamid Karzai retains its power over a population that sees it as an illegitimate puppet. It can only mean more interference, more resistance, and more bloodshed. Worst of all, more delays before the country can finally emerge from decades of war for stable and permanent peace. This war is in its 11th year. How much more time before NATO realizes that there is no military solution to Afghanistan? There is no military solution to Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ali. The next speaker that we're going to be having up here is going to be talking about a pretty historic demonstration that's going to be happening in Chicago tomorrow during the NATO summit, when thousands and thousands of people are expected to turn up at a demonstration where former US soldiers are going to be protesting against the NATO agenda and protesting against the occupation of Afghanistan. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chris Vassy, who's a US war resister who is stationed here in Canada. Chris.
Hi everybody. Long ago, I was once known as U.S. Army Sergeant Christopher Vassy. I served 15 months in Afghanistan from 2007 into 2008. During my missing year, I was part of extreme missions, 30 to 40 days on end, seek and destroy, uncovering the enemy by building a temporary presence in local villages. Every so often we would receive fire only to return it, and other times we would do what we called recon by fire, firing randomly into areas to see if people were there. I'm ashamed to say we would call it come out wherever you are. Our presence in most areas was for 30 days or so before there was a new mission to take part in. We stayed in an area long enough to stir it up and cause tension, and then we eventually left. We had the ability to always cry foul or claim we were scared for our lives, even when men would shoot at cars out of fear, or when rounds would land in the wrong houses or the wrong areas and kill innocent people. I found a situation where both the occupier and the occupied cannot justify the foreign presence and NATO presence there. With each battle, attack, or screw-up, we saw more reasons for the US and NATO to get mad about being forced into an action, and our anger showed itself in its worst forms during our retaliation periods. What I found was a war that was guaranteed to do only one thing: escalate. Each year we rile up more and more people with the unlimited resources of bullets, armor, Humvees, and bombs, along with Dairy Queen, Tim Hortons, and Subway restaurants, the largest air bases in Afghanistan. This war was clearly all about money and sustainment. There's too much money to be made. That's why it hasn't ended yet. I cannot tell you all how many bags of rice, beans, clothing, cases of water, etc. were not handed out to the local people unless we screwed up. So why NATO? Why turn in our medals? Because Americans, Canadians, British, French, German, Polish, and all other NATO countries involved, the civilians in these countries are sick of it. They want it to end. These leaders of state that are also part of NATO care not about their own constituents to allow this to continue happening. Tomorrow, my brothers and sisters from Iraq vets against the war, Afghan vets against the war, and Vietnam vets against the war are going to be turning in their medals back to the NATO generals who issued them.
Nice.
For 11 years now, we've spent well over $300 million per day on these wars, while the situation deteriorates and our people at home suffer. We have people starving in our own countries while we waste our funds foolishly continuing these occupations. An Iraq vet named Stephen Aitchison, who will be there tomorrow handing in his medals, had this to say: "I feel like this is really just a good way for me, not just to clear my conscience, but to make a step in the direction of healing and reconciling with the Afghan and Iraqi people, and to let them know that we're standing by their side and not with NATO. We don't agree with these policies." One thing that happens to us when us soldiers get back from the war is we find out the real war is at home. When we return to society, when guys get caught up in drugs and alcohol, depression, PTSD, we receive no or little help from the Veteran Affairs Office. A lot of us are misdiagnosed and given the wrong medications that actually cause suicidal tendencies in the patients that are taking them. They're misdiagnosing us. 18 veterans per day commit suicide. Along with IBAW will be a mother named Mary Kirkland, who she doesn't have medals to turn in for her son. All she has is a picture to give back. After his first deployment, his mother said that he was withdrawn and on edge constantly. He confessed to taking part in what he called a murder. He was placed on psychotropic drugs and sent back again to Iraq sometime later. He tried to take his own life twice and was still placed on low to moderate risk. On March 19, 2010, he succeeded. He was found hanging in his room. More soldiers die under their own hand than they are in combat. 1 in every 4 homeless men in the States is a veteran. Hundreds of thousands of innocent Iraqis and Afghans have lost their lives without so much as a peep of remorse from NATO. And this is why we protest. Standing with IVAW will be VVAW, who also did a similar action in 1971. Barry Romo, a lieutenant who was at that event in 1971, had this to say: "Wives left husbands. Parents said, those medals were something you should give to your grandkids. But the level of death was too much for us to deal with. And we said, if it's a question of medals versus lives, then there is no question." VVAW will represent a few of us currently AWOL in Canada, those of us members of the War Resisters Support Campaign. Since 2004, American soldiers have been coming up to seek refuge in Canada, refusing to fight in Afghanistan or Iraq, many of them who already have previous combat tours, so they know the illegality of these conflicts. And VVAW will be representing a few of us that are up here. The list I've compiled are as follows: PFC Kimberly Rivera, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Overseas Service Ribbon, Army Service Ribbon, Global War on Terror Service Ribbon, Global War on Terror Expeditionary Ribbon, Iraqi Campaign, National Defense. Sergeant Corey Glass, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Overseas Service, Army Service, Global War on Terror Service, Global War on Terror Expeditionary, Iraq Campaign, National Defense. Corporal Jeremy Brockway, U.S. Marine Corps, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Overseas Service, Global War on Terror Service, Global War on Terror Expeditionary, Iraq Campaign, Combat Action Ribbon, Good Conduct. Specialist Promotable, Jules Tindungen, NATO Ribbon, Presidential Unit Citation, Overseas Service, Army Service, Global War on Terror Service, Global War on Terror Expedition, Afghan Campaign, Southwest Asia Service, National Defense, Good Conduct. And myself, Sergeant Vassie, Army Presidential Unit Citation, NATO Ribbon, Overseas Service, Army Service, Global War on Terror Expedition and Service, Afghan Campaign, Southwest Asia Service, National Defense, Army Achievement Medal, Army Commendation Medal, and Army Good Conduct Medal. They could have it all back.
Way to go! The man.
End the occupation! Troops out now! 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 End the occupation! Troops out now!
If I may, I'd like to give a quote from former 5-star General Ike Eisenhower. "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, from those who are cold and not clothed." My brothers and sisters that are turning in our medals tomorrow, we're doing it as an act of healing for ourselves, but for all the innocent people we've killed, for all the enemies we've killed, for all the soldiers on our side that have died. We need to put a stop to it. I'd like to give the names of a few men I can never forget. Sergeant First Class Rocky Herrera, Sergeant Corey Clark, Sergeant Bryce Howard, PFC Jordan Good, Sergeant Zachary Talir, and Sergeant Tyler Juden, all of whom were killed in action in Afghanistan, and I'll never forget them. So this is for you guys. End these wars!
Nice.
Something that Chris mentioned there is that there has been a campaign in this country for a number of years now, since Jeremy Hintzman came up to Canada in 2004, calling for the war resistors who are standing up for peace and justice to be allowed to stay in this country if they want to be able to go on with their lives and to be able to put this behind them. We are in a situation, however, where the Harper government, as we know, is trying to ship them back to be punished because they didn't want to kill people, which is an absolutely absurd statement, but this is something that the Harper government is trying to do. There are members from the War Resisters Support Campaign who are here today, and they have petitions, and they've been wandering around in the crowd. Lee, hold up your petition so everyone can see it, so people can come over and sign the petition and make sure that we can do everything in our power to allow them to stay in this country. The people we don't want in this country are the Tories. We want Harper out. More resistors in. Harper out. Resistors in. Harper out. Resistors in. Harper out. Resistors in.
Harper out! Resistors in! Harper out!
The next speaker that's going to be coming up here is a longtime activist in the city of Toronto, a trade union activist who also sits on the steering committee of the Canadian Peace Alliance and has been working on the War Resistor Support Campaign for a number of years. So sisters and brothers, please welcome Michelle Robidoux.
Thank you, Sid. Brothers and sisters, I want to start with what Chris was talking about. That people are sick of these wars. They are sick of the priorities. They are sick of what NATO is doing around the world in their name. And we're here today, obviously, because we know that the 1% have endless money for these wars, but at the same time they say there's no money for social programs, for jobs, for addressing the growing climate crisis, for the needs of the 99%. So we're here because every day more and more people are coming into conflict with the priorities of that system that puts endless amounts of money into destroying people's lives, into occupying their countries, into ruining the lives of the military individuals who are doing these wars for them, who are fighting these wars for them. Now we're seeing immense turmoil around the world, and I don't know if any of you were watching the live webcams last night in Montreal as 20, 30, 50,000 people took to the streets opposing the brutal law that Jean Charest has imposed against the student protests and basically making the protests and the resistance illegal. We've seen these kinds of protests around the world. We're seeing them in Europe, and yesterday in Chicago, where the NATO summit is taking place and the G8 meeting is happening and where our Prime Minister is at this moment, there was a banner by National Nurses United that says, "Nurses Campaign to Heal the World, an economy for the 99%, tax Wall Street, end the wars." That is the kind of message that resonates with millions and millions of people around the world. Now, our government has a particular role to play in this, and we have a particular role as peace activists in this country to respond to it. The pace at which our government is working overtime to rip up supports for social programs, to silence dissent, to rip up regulations that would protect the environment, that would protect workers at work, that would protect human rights, the defunding of advocacy organizations, the relentless push to divide and conquer, to divide Muslim and non-Muslim, native and non-native, immigrant or born in Canada, to divide us from each other so that we can't oppose these plans that they have. They are working overtime, and they're branding anyone who dissents from this project, as we know, as terrorists, un-Canadian, foreigners, whatever they want to name it. But they're also very vulnerable on the question of the war agenda. And we've seen it with the F-35 fighter jets. We've seen it when the figures come out about how much they are pouring into it, and the fact that they're cutting, or they want to cut, the services for returning veterans, the people that Chris talked about, who are destroyed by what they've been forced to do in our name, and come back and have no psychiatric services, no health services available to them. Now, I'm here actually to make a pitch to all of you. It's a very serious pitch. We know that there are many, many people in motion on many, many different fronts across the country. It's whether it's the Enbridge pipeline on the West Coast, the Montreal students, the protests here recently against the McGuinty budget. But there is a solution that we can pose. They say they have no money. The money is there. They're pouring it into the military. We need a mass campaign for peace and prosperity, not war and austerity, and that actually can run on so many channels that exist already that people are fighting on. But that means that the peace movement, and specifically I think the Canadian Peace Alliance in this country, needs your help. We need resources to do this. We have an alternative. People need to hear these figures, they need to know the facts, and also we need to prepare for the next war they're going to launch. There's no doubt that our government is the main pillar of support for the belligerent tone against Iran. And we know from the experience of building a movement against the war in Iraq, and we succeeded in keeping Canadian troops out of Iraq, but we know what it took to mobilize that. We know it's coming. We need help. We need resources. I have a bucket here. There are buckets elsewhere. I'm urging anyone here who can toss in whatever you can, hopefully paper, to help build that movement, to pay for things like this, and also to build that campaign. We want a different set of priorities. The Canadian Peace Alliance also has a series of monthly donors. If you can provide $5 or $10 or $15 or $20 a month to help build that fighting fund to stop the next war and to build a world where the priorities of the 99% dominate, every little bit counts. So please, I urge you to make a donation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. We do have an awful lot of tasks on our plate as a peace movement. There was a time back in 2003 where our main focus obviously was campaigning against the war in Iraq. Sorry, we're about to lose a speaker there. Whereas now we have so many different fronts that are opened up. We've got so many different international solidarity campaigns that the Peace Alliance has been involved in. We're working on the campaign to stop a potential war with Iran and to end the war in Afghanistan, and much larger issues around Stephen Harper's drive to militarize Canada. And that's why we also launched the Peace and Prosperity, Not War and Austerity campaign. Because we know the Harper government isn't just putting massive billions of dollars into F-35 jets and into the Canada First Defence Strategy, which is a huge increase in military spending. But we also know they're trying to militarize other aspects of Canadian life. Citizenship ceremonies now require military speakers to talk about the military as the highest expression of Canadian citizenship. In fact, they've rewritten the handbook to make sure that they talk almost exclusively about the military when they're talking about the best kind of citizen that a Canadian can be. This is a militarizing drive that Stephen Harper has been pushing, and we're going to stand up against it. There are postcards on the table there for the Peace and Prosperity, Not War and Austerity campaign. Fill one out. Take some extras. Take them to your friends. We need to build up a huge base here to stand up and say that we do not want money to be going into the military rather than into healthcare and education and things that people actually need. That's where the money should be going. Our next speaker is going to be coming up from a group called the Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid. Many of you know Kaya here in the city of Toronto. And as we had said, we are also looking this week, of course, at the anniversary of the Nakba, the catastrophe that led to the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. So please welcome Sri from Kaya.
Thank you. My name is Sri Ramanant. I'm a member of the Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid and Labour for Palestine. I want to thank the organizers of this event. This is an important issue, and we stand here in solidarity with the anti-war movement, with the movement against Nato, and with the larger struggle against imperialism in here and across the world. This is also important because, as Sid mentioned, this week is the commemoration, the 64th year of Nakba, the day when 64 years back Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their lands, the day that they lost their homes, thousands of lives were lost, and millions of refugees created in the West Bank and all over the world, including right here in Canada. But those 64 years have not been without a glorious, glorious resistance against the oppression that the Palestinians face. And in July 2005, the Palestinians added another chapter to that resistance by issuing what we call the BDS call. And they issued a call to boycott, divest, and sanction the State of Israel until the Palestinians have the right to return, the occupation ends, and apartheid that the Palestinians face in the State of Israel and in the West Bank and Gaza ends. The Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid emerged as a result of that call, and we stand in solidarity with that call. We seek to implement that call here in Toronto and under the leadership of the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment and Sanction National Committee. Thank you. It's nice to actually get claps for that. We do many things, among others, which is implement boycott, divestment, sanctions programs, campaigns. One of our most recent campaigns has been protesting the Israeli delegation at the Hot Docs Convention. And I'd like to just take a moment to thank the many people who wrote letters for that campaign protesting the Israeli delegation. Just wanted to thank you all for that. We received many letters for that, and we consider that quite a success. the days of, and what we're seeing as a result of the BDS movement is that the days of Israel being able to act with impunity and get away with it are over. The days that Israel can do whatever they want and get away with it without the world taking a look at it are over. And 2 years back, in May 2010, I'll just wait a second for that to get by. All right. 2 years back in May 2010, the Mavi Marmara, a humanitarian ship that was attempting to break the blockade of Gaza, was boarded by the Israeli Navy illegally, and 9 Turkish nationals were killed. Israel has not apologized for that action, and because of that, they have faced continuing sanctions and even some isolation from NATO itself, an imperialist institution that Israel, an imperialist attack dog, seeks to get into. So just as Israel is now unable to get away with what they want, so too is NATO unable to get away with the impunity with which they have rendered savage destruction upon so many lands across the world. And this rally stands as testament and a manifestation of the fact that NATO cannot get away with that there will be brave voices like that, of what we heard of even Chris, coming out and speaking out against imperialist war, against expansionism, against militarism, and against profit at the cost of humanity. I'd like to take this final opportunity to just announce an event, that a student-led demonstration that we're having tomorrow at 2 p.m. on Bloor and Avenue Road in front of the Israeli consulate. This is a weekend commemoration of the 64th anniversary of Nakba, and a solidarity rally held with prisoners, Palestinian prisoners who have been on hunger strike, waging a struggle for their rights. I ask you all to come there, show your solidarity, and I thank you very much for this, and hope that we can see more of you at our rallies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, brother. Our next speaker is another activist who's been involved in the campaigns against war for a number of years here in the city of Toronto, and another one of the founding members of Afghans for Peace, who can be talking about the connection, obviously, between these various different issues that we're looking at here today. Please welcome Hamna.
Hello, guys. Here we are again, protesting against this war from the beginning of it, waiting, chanting, and hoping that it would not be extended. And here we stand today as it has been extended to go on for however long these warmongers desire. But we must not lose faith. We should stand here strong and chant with the voices of resistance from Afghanistan and keep denouncing the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization, also known as NATO. Their plans will fail because the truth always prevails. The world may accept this extending handshake of the Strategic Partnership Agreement, but Afghans are once again ignored. They're not asked what they think is best for them. The leaders who come up with these decisions simply choose what they think is best for themselves, which is obviously filling up bank accounts with the money they made from militarization. Once again, they decided their fate by choosing to continue with this war, yet only a soulless person would be in support of a war that sheds bloods of innocents of people. In the name of pseudo-democracy, the American and Canadian flags that wave from Afghanistan are a representation of imperialism, not humanity. The red stripes may just symbolize the blood of those innocents murdered in the ongoing illegal wars that are continued with the name of help, but actually create hell. I sadly have not had the chance to go to Afghanistan, but each picture I see, I wish to go inside that beautiful place that is nature's paradise. The beauty is breathtaking, and it's being destroyed by the hands of those who claim to free us from the oppression of slavery, yet they're the ones that are oppressing us while they hold the keys. The situation is no different on the other side of the border, where the productive policies of drone strikes kill people in their sleep. I, for one, will never understand how can something as harmful as unmanned drones and night raids be productive. The very nature of these things yells out destructive. When I heard of the NATO blockade in Pakistan, I felt a sense of relief, yet I know it was too good to be true. This act Pakistan was pulling to show its disapproval towards the drone strikes wasn't going to be up for too long. The same government that finds unmanned drones counterproductive allows arms to be supplied to Afghanistan. Yeah, that doesn't sound right. I knew it wouldn't be too long till Pakistan has to capitulate to the American pressures into opening its borders once again. Instead, the containers that were allowed to enter were office supplies for the embassy, but we know that what else will be entering in the future with those supplies. The open border policy has disgusted me and ashamed me as a Pakistani, because innocent lives on both sides have lost due to this contempt-filled friendship between Pakistan and America. The money that Pakistan receives from America doesn't feed any empty stomachs, and the help Afghanistan receives from America doesn't liberate anybody. I wish both governments could look at the state of their people and stop shaking hands with the enemy. Since shaking hands with them, since each year has been over 10 years of war, since it has been over 10 years of war, and if their interest remains to kill innocent people and steal resources. And if you look at if you look at Afghanistan, you will notice the instability caused by Nato. Things were bad enough in 2001 before Nato had entered the scene of Afghanistan, and 11 years later, it still remains the same. Afghans had already enough scars to deal with when NATO came banging at the door with guns and a sign of peace, yet the state of the country is far from peaceful. The ongoing carnage in the name of democracy has brought fatality on Afghans. This war on terror is nothing but terror itself. Fighting terror by terrorizing innocent individuals has led to the catastrophe in this country. I would like to end off with a few words by Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers. The Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers are a grassroots group of ordinary multi-ethnic Afghans seeking a life of non-violence. They seek non-military solutions for Afghanistan. You can visit their website at ourjourneytosmile.com. To all the leaders of our world, the leaders of the US-led coalition, the Afghan government, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and regional countries, we are intolerably angry. All our senses are hurting. Our women, our men, and yes, shame on you, our children are grieving. Your Afghan civilian military strategy is murderous. Stench we smell, we hear and breathe. President Obama and all the elite players and people of the world, why? America's $250 million annual communications budget just to screen propaganda on this war of perceptions. We will no longer be passive prey to your disrespectful systems. Your systems feed the rich and powerful. They're glaringly unequal. They do not listen, do not think, and worse, they do not care. We choose not to gluttonize with you. We choose not to be trained by you. We choose not to be pawned with you. We choose not to be pawned by you. We henceforth refuse every weapon you kill us with, every dollar you bait us with, and every lie you manipulate us with. We're not beasts. We're Afghan Americans. We're Afghans, Americans, Europeans, Asians, and global citizens. We refuse to prostitute our hearts and minds. We refuse you. We would try not to throw our shoes at you. We would try to recognize the better side of all human beings, and thus continue to serve our commoners tea and bread to one and all. But we do ask and plead and demand that you stop your unsustainable superpower. We want peace. We want you out. And I would just like to end off. And there's just one more thing that I would like to end off with. I'm collecting donations on behalf of Alia Foundation. She's a colleague at Afghans for Peace, and she started a fundraiser for building 2 schools in Afghanistan. And you can donate on aliafoundation.com, or you could come to me and give me any donations you like, because every donation counts, and it's for education. It's something that the states, the military power, United States, is not offering, or even Canada. So thank you so much. Peace and love.
End the occupation!
Troops out now! End the occupation! Troops out now! End the occupation! Troops out now!
End the occupation! Troops out now! End the occupation!
All right, sisters and brothers, we've got one final speaker here today. Before we start our picket, what we're going to do is we're going to set ourselves up on the sidewalk there. We want to spend some time chanting and making sure that those folks in the U.S. consulate hear us and know that we're in opposition to the policies of the U.S. government and of NATO, as well as the government here in Canada. But our last speaker is a representative of a group called the Palestinian Youth Movement. Please welcome Lean. Once you get her in the truck, it's a little high.
Okay, before we get started, can I hear a loud Free Palestine?
Free Palestine!
Okay, no, this is not loud enough. Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
A bit better, but we could do much better than that. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
There you go. Today we commemorate the 64th anniversary of the brutal attack and massacre against the people of Palestine. 64 years of occupation, oppression, and building illegal settlements. We are a nation that does not give up. Even if we stay 64 years under occupation, we are a generation that does not forget, we are a generation that does not forgive, and we are the generation that will bring Palestine back. Salute to our prisoners that have been on a strike for 78 days. We have more than 4,000 prisoners in the illegal Israeli jails. More than 1,500 of them have been on a strike, just asking for their basic needs, a better living day behind the bars. Sorry. Okay, let's chant. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free.
Okay, so we want Palestine from the river to the sea. So let's make this point clear. From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free.
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free.
I am a third Palestinian refugee, and I have never been to Palestine. And I know with this, I'm speaking on behalf of thousands of refugees. But thanks to our parents and grandparents that passed on their stories and memories to us, we are a generation that even if we don't free Palestine, we will pass our grandparents' memories and our grandparents' stories to our kids, to our grandkids, until we get Palestine back! Freedom for Palestine!
For Palestine!
Freedom for Palestine!
Freedom for Palestine!
Justice for Palestine!
Justice for Palestine!
Justice for Palestine!
Justice for Palestine!
Our prisoners are not a secondary matter. They are our priority. Our refugees are not a secondary matter. They are a priority. So our prisoners are a priority. Our refugees are a priority. And freeing Palestine is our number one priority. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Thank you very, very much, Lean. I'm standing down here because it's hard for me to get up onto the truck there. But what we're going to do, if people can get themselves prepped, we're going to line up on the street over here. We have a giant Troops Out of Afghanistan banner that we want to point at the U.S. consulate. We're going to stand and we're going to start the picket as we wander up and down University Avenue here. We're just going to go for a little bit so people can get some shots, and then we're probably going to be able to wrap up here today. Afghanistan to Palestine, occupation is a crime.
Afghanistan to Palestine, occupation is a crime. David Macy, nice to meet you, man. I read a little bit about you, man. You're a man. Keep doing it, keep doing it. I'm live streaming, man.
Oh, live streaming. Yeah, and the wars, man.
And the wars,
And the
exactly,
wars.
man. Children, for the children's sake, you know.
Forever, yeah.
I even emailed the CIA, told them, for your sake, smarten up, man. You know?
Yeah, they're getting,
Anything we can do, bro.
they're getting used just the same as such a mess. Waste.
Well, we're here. That's what counts, man. Good to see you again.
Peace.
Keep it in your heart. Heart can't feel the head.
From Belfast to Palestine!
Occupation is a crime!
From Belfast to Palestine!
Occupation is a crime!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine! Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
From Afghanistan to Palestine! From Afghanistan to Palestine!
Occupation is a crime!
From Afghanistan to Palestine!
Occupation is a crime!
From Afghanistan to Palestine!
Occupation is a crime!
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free!
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free! Occupation is a crime!
NATO, USA, how many kids did you kill today?
NATO, USA, how many kids did you kill today?
NATO, USA, how many kids did you kill today?
How many kids did you kill today?
NATO, USA, how many kids did you kill today?
The people united will never be defeated. 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 The people united will never be defeated.
United will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated.
Zionism is racism.
Zionism is racism.
Down with Zionism.
Down with Zionism.
Zionism is racism.
Zionism is racism.
Down with Zionism.
Down with Zionism.
Zionism is racism. Down with Zionism. Down with Zionism. Free Palestine.
Free, free Palestine!
Free
Palestine!
Justice for Palestine.
Freedom for Palestine!
Justice for Palestine.
Justice for Palestine!
Freedom for Palestine.
Freedom for Palestine! Justice for Palestine! Freedom for Palestine!
1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want this racist war.
1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want this racist war.
1, 2, 3, 4.
We don't want this racist war.
1, 2, 3, 4.
We don't want this racist war.
1, 2, 3, 4.
We don't want this racist war.
5, 6, 7, 8. Smash the Zionist state. Stop the killing. Stop the hate. Stop the killing. Stop the hate. 5, 6, 7, 8. Stop the killing. Stop the hate. 5, 6, 7, 8. Stop the killing. Stop the hate. The war on terror is a lie. The war on terror is a lie. 9/11 truth now. Afghanistan to Palestine.
Occupation is a crime.
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 Occupation is a crime. Afghanistan to Palestine.
Occupation is a crime. Occupation is a crime. Occupation is a crime. Occupation is a crime.
Honestly, like, I thought,
Free, free Palestine!
like for I think here's a really interesting example. Just recently, I mentioned that to Jim to CFS. Well, the person who ran that ran the student union requirement was Jerry Sullivan.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
You know what Jerry Sullivan at the same time, while he was the executive